It's so awkward. Okay.
I'm glad that you're finding it as uncomfortable as me.
I was never like this before.
No, because you'll be in Chinese, you'll be like, yeah, this is my channel, guys.
欢迎你们来到我的频道。这期我邀请我很喜欢的朋友 Emily, but I can't speak Chinese. Fine. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm really pleased to be at my friend Emily's home and doing my first what's your profession in English. I'm a bit nervous to be honest, but having Emily here really makes me feel better.
Normally I would correct Vicky's grammar, but on this occasion we're just gonna let it flow and see what happens.
So Emily works at one of the largest consumer product company in the world. She works in the corporate communication, specifically crisis management. And I'll leave it to her to give you a brief introduction of her profession and what she's doing.
Hi everyone, so yeah, as Vicky said, I work in the crisis communications team at Unilever. So we operate over 400 brands in I think over 190 countries, if I'm getting that statistic correct. And to help explain what my team do, we always say that we are the guardians of Unilever's reputation. That could mean anything from, handling media inquiries with journalists, right through to responding to consumer questions on social media, or indeed, managing those really important relationships with key stakeholders like governments and charities. So yeah, the corporate communications team have a really big task to do. We're a really big global team. I sit in the central kind of global team, so I work with all different markets on a daily basis, which is amazing.
So are you sitting within the headquarters of Unilever, overseeing all those brands?
Yeah, so we sit in the headquarters in London. We work across all different brands, all different markets. And it's our team's responsibility to manage the processes and the tools that help the business prepare for crisis and deal with crisis effectively when it happens, or when there's a risk to either our operations or to our reputation. So it's a big job.
What are the processes and tools you are talking about?
We set what we call our issues management process. We actually don't use the word crisis at Unilever because we think crisis equals kind of fear, panic. We want people to stay calm. So we call them, kind of call it issues and incidents. And we set the process, so the theory behind how to respond to issues and incidents, how to think calmly, the steps you need to take, who are the key people that need to be in a team that manage those reputational matters. We also have some tools which of course help us. We're a really big matrix organisation. As you can imagine, there's a lot of stakeholders to manage and a lot of people that you have to keep informed in the process. I think trust is a really, really big part of crisis communications. And
trust with your clients or trust with the government or media?
Well, and possibly everyone, but trust obviously with our consumers, that they can trust our reputation and our brands and our products and their safety and quality, but trust as well internally as well, so making sure that the right internal stakeholders are kept informed. Our CEO needs to know of any major reputational threats, and we need to make sure that we're taking the steps effectively to deal with those threats and that we are delivering the best possible services for our consumers.
But before we get into it, I'd like to learn a little bit about what leads you to this profession. What did you do and what did you study in uni?
Yeah, so we'll go on a trip down memory lane, as we say in English. So at school, I'm like the queen of the art subjects. I loved languages and I loved the humanities. 4 subjects that I studied in the later years of high school was art, English literature, French and history. So it left a pretty big option for me in terms of what I wanted to do in the future. I never really knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but something that also kind of stretched me intellectually and academically. In the end, that side took control. I ended up studying history, which I'm really passionate about. I think it's an amazing subject. It teaches you so many lessons about the world, about geopolitical issues and conflicts around the world, and also I think it really fundamentally teaches you how to form a really strong logical argument, and that's helped me both in my work and in my my personal life as well, when I'm forming debates with friends and I'm learning different perspectives. I love history, I'm very passionate about history, so studied history and I went to Durham University, which is one of the oldest universities in London, in the UK. It's not in London, it's in the north of England. And pretty much as close to Scotland as you can possibly get without going to Scotland. And that was an amazing place, and a really historical place as well, so it was the perfect place to study history. And when I graduated, again, I think I didn't really know what to do. I thought, oh, okay, I still think I want to do something creative, but I hadn't really got my plan in place. So in my final year, I remember applying to lots of advertising agency grad schemes, and I actually ended up working for a small kind of boutique creative agency in East London, which was amazing because I got the kind of basics of account management, which is quite well suited to me in terms of project management, organisation, managing clients, and I got to work on some amazing clients there. You know, I was very, very privileged. It was a great place to learn. But I still felt a little bit unfulfilled. That's when I think I started looking at other jobs, and I came across this amazing role at the UK government's Department for Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, so it's known as DEFRA, which is the acronym. And that was the most amazing role for me, and I kind of stumbled upon it and applied, and one thing led to another, and I suddenly found myself working on this amazing campaign for the UK government which promoted British food and drink products internationally.
If you have watched Emily in Paris, about Emily promoting the champagne, this Emily is doing exactly the same.
Emily in London.
But you're promoting it to Japanese audience,
yeah,
right?
So we had a different range of markets. We mainly focused on the US, Japan and China as well, actually. So it was really cool getting to learn about different perceptions of British food. I think a lot of Chinese people, correct me if I'm mistaken, they maybe think British food is really bland, it's beige, potatoes, just not very nice. That was some of our consumer understanding at least. But we focused mainly on a few key exports: British beef, British gin, whiskey. We kind of targeted different importers of these products. And it was a kind of challenge to try and build trust in these products and change their perception in these countries. So that was an amazing campaign to work on.
Really cool.
Yeah, I kind of pinched myself that I managed to travel to Osaka in Japan and New York got to call it work, and it was incredible. It was a really great experience. So yeah, I was sort of on this public sector route, working on this government campaign. I got slightly itchy feet, as we call it. So when you want to change. So a few years later, I thought, okay, I'll see what's out there again. I ended up working for a company called London and Partners, which is basically London's kind of international trade, investment and tourism body, and it's part of the Mayor of London's office. So again, a really unique place to work, a great place to learn. I found myself in the world of kind of London tech startups and working kind of more on the business side, which I found really interesting. But yet again, I got itchy feet. I don't know what that says about me, if I kind of like to move around a little bit, but I'll touch on that later. I then kind of, again, stumbled upon the job at Unilever, which sounded super interesting. I always wanted to work for Unilever, actually. We had a neighbour near where I grew up at home who worked on Dove's Real Beauty campaign when it first launched, and it was this massive campaign at the time all about beauty standards for women and the insecurities that young girls develop, and that had always really inspired me. So yeah, one thing led to another, and here I am in this job. I'm really loving it, and if anything, I'd say overall my experiences for anyone similar to me who maybe isn't sure if they want to kind of pursue something a bit more creative or go into marketing or communications, I think, be open to all the options at the beginning. I never thought for 1 minute that I'd be working on some, beauty and fashion brands, and then I'd work for the UK government in food, and then I'd work in tech and business startups, and I think be really open to all experiences. And I think actually sometimes being a good generalist is probably the best advice that I could give. It really prepares you to deal with new subject matter, pick things up quickly, real breadth of experiences that maybe you wouldn't get if you specialised from the very beginning. So yeah, that's my kind of story, I suppose.
That's amazing. So when you change from a public sector to, say, a technology and then to a consumer product, was it hard to leverage your previous knowledge, especially industry knowledge, to the new job?
I would say there are some principles that really transfer well from the public to the private sector. I actually spoke about this in my Unilever interview, and I you know, I was very conscious of, oh, I kind of have my training now in the public sector, and will I be prepared for the big bad world of the private sector? And actually, yeah, my director made a really good point that actually in the public sector, everything you do is accountable to taxpayers' money. In our government campaign, we had to make sure that every penny that we spent, every inch of money that we spent was justified, and there was value on investment and return on investment. In that same vein, granted, in the private sector there might be bigger budgets, a bit more resource, but actually the principles really remain the same, I think. So, you know, at Unilever, obviously we are accountable to our shareholders, and we get questions from shareholders and investors, and we have to hold ourselves to account. So, you know, yes, it's a bit more performance driven in the private sector, but I think the principles very much remain the same.
So I am always very interested in this crisis management, although you don't call it crisis, but like, what is your day-to-day like, and what are some interesting stories if you are able to share?
Yeah, so obviously in my line of work there's a lot of kind of confidentiality, so I can't share all the details. But yeah, I'd say overall my role can be really varied. You know, what I love about it is, like I said, I work with teams all across the world in all different markets. So one minute I might be in India, and then I'm in China the next minute, and then Israel the next. You know, it's amazing. You know, within 2 hours I connect with colleagues across vast geographical scopes. I have to be able to apply my global lens of understanding to lots of different markets, but obviously each market is very complex and has its own geopolitical, social differences. So it's so interesting learning about all these different kind of challenges in different regions. And that's something I love about the job, is that I'm always learning. I'm always, yeah, I feel like I'm on, you know, a bit of a holiday sometimes, discovering so much about different markets.
That's part of you, because you're always really curious about different culture, new things in the world.
Yeah, I'm very open-minded, and I love working globally. So day to day can really differ. So, you know, on a quiet day, that's a good thing in the crisis world, because it means that you're doing your job correctly, and that you've mitigated some of the threats. No news is good news, as we say, and it's the opposite of like PR basically, because you know, in the PR world, and I work with our media relations team, you know, their benchmark of success is very much coverage and landing coverage and getting lots of news, whereas it's unique because our team is almost like, actually, if we can make sure there's no news about this topic, that's success in our minds.
Do you work closely with PR though?
Yeah, so of course I think you've got to look at the external communications outputs really holistically. So you have to look at it from a proactive lens and a reactive lens. And often, you know, when you're being bolder and braver with the campaigns, you have to also prepare the reactive side. So, you know, we always have to be that devil's advocate of saying, well, what would consumers be thinking? Would they be challenging this? What questions would they have? And you've got to bear that in mind as part of the planning. But yeah, a quieter day could be, yeah, a bit more administrative. It might be working with suppliers on the tools that we work on to help monitor the media landscape across the world. But of course, part of working in kind of crisis is of course being reactive to when things get busy, and it can get a bit hectic. Sometimes at short notice, you might have a tight deadline from a journalist, or there might be a stakeholder letter maybe to our CEO that needs some consideration that you need to then plan a response. Often it's being quick moving. You have to kind of find the right experts internally, which obviously in a big organisation can be quite challenging. You've got to think on your feet, you've got to be agile, and you've got to remain pretty calm and patient as well, because you can't let yourself get stressed by it, and you have to just make sure you're doing all you can to work across time zones, work to the deadline. Sometimes you might need to negotiate a deadline extension. So you've got to be really mindful of all these different factors. But actually I think working in crisis teaches you that when you're quiet and you work in this line of work, you have to kind of enjoy the time. So if you can log off at 5:30 at the end of the day, then you should. But with the knowledge that when things do get busy again, you have to pick it up, and you might have to drop a few social plans, and you have to be, you know, responsive quite quickly. So my friends are always very understanding if I'm like, sorry guys, I was meant to come to dinner, but I can't now. But they understand that that's part of my job.
I know you've been extremely busy in the past few months, like Emily basically working 7 days a week and like work till post past midnight. Last night when I talked to you, it was around midnight and you were still working.
I wasn't working all day though, I was probably just doing a little bit of extra. I'm also very...
Yesterday was Saturday.
I'm a very hard worker though, and it does depend. So, you know, particularly in communications, you sometimes have some out of hours work, and actually we try and split that across the team. So we have a kind of media monitoring rota, so we take it in turns, so we take a week at a time each. And yeah, it's your job for that week, including weekends, to monitor the global media landscape.
What is a media landscape?
It basically means that we have to keep track of all the different publications and what they're sharing at any one point. So if a journalist has shared something in China, or if a journalist has shared something in, you know, the UK or Ireland or France, or, you know, wherever it is, we try and monitor that. We keep track of all the different types of articles that get released at different times, and so when you're on the media monitoring kind of rota, you basically just have to summarise each article and share a report in the morning to say, here's the news of the day, and this is how Unilever is mentioned. It's just something that we have to monitor and keep track of as part of our kind of reputation management discipline.
So what are the key skill sets that you see as really essential for your current position?
So I would say the main skill set that you'll need working in communications is writing. You know, there's very little patience, I think, in communications for poor writing, you know, typos, grammatical errors. You've got to make sure that your attention to detail is really strong. You know, often I'm forced to work with subject matter that's sometimes a bit alien to me. I don't always know the detail, but it's an ability to pull out the key bits of information and sometimes condense really complicated technical language into really simple, easy to understand. Because a lot of the work we do is obviously, some of it's quite scientific, like the ingredients that go into beauty products, for example. So it's learning to translate things like that into simple language that, you know, you'll then see potentially on a bottle or on our website, or when we're explaining it to a journalist in the media. So writing simply and the ability to edit well is really, really important. I also think, and this kind of ties back to the conversation we had around kind of intellectual curiosity and interest in the world, I think, you know, to be a successful communicator, particularly in a global business, you need to be news hungry. You know, you need to read the news, you need to try and understand geopolitical challenges and differences, the nuances that you need to know about. I think it's really important that you're open-minded and that you're always learning about different regional setups. And also, like I said earlier, I think, you know, particularly working in the kind of crisis side of communications, keeping a cool head and being really organised is really important. Organisation is close to my heart, as Vicky will know. But I think, yeah, being organised and actually, you know, like I said, it's spotting the risks so that if they do happen, then you are well prepared.
So aside from journalists, who are the other stakeholders that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
I think a lot of the time we might get inquiries on lots of different subject matters, so it's kind of my job partly to find the right experts internally. So for example, if we had a query about plastics, then I would go to our plastics team and, you know, talk to the plastic expert, and, you know, would share knowledge, would share statistics, and that all feeds into, you know, the external communications handling. And what I love is that I'm always learning from my colleagues. You know, everyone's got such amazing expertise on so many different topics, whether that's human rights or plastics or palm oil, and, you know, that's what I love about Unilever, is that actually at the heart of our mission is sustainability and purpose, and I think everyone feels really passionate about what we're doing as a company. I love that I'm always learning about these topics, particularly ones that are so important for the future of our planet and people.
So you have briefly mentioned about the writing skills, the curiosity. Is there any specific qualifications he or she needed in order to pass the interview, you think?
I would say the majority of my colleagues don't have qualifications from those courses specifically. I would say probably don't be as focused on those necessarily, it's more about the experience. And I think in an interview working in communications, a lot of the time it's the core skills. It's maybe the experience of dealing with things that maybe haven't gone to plan and how you responded. You know, it's project management and effective organisation, it's your writing skills. So I would probably personally advise to focus on enhancing those skills rather than necessarily going out and getting a formal qualification. You know, I studied history. I've mentioned that I studied history at university, and that, you know, I have no formal communications training, but, you know, my history degree did in some ways teach me the art of communication and logic and forming arguments and writing persuasively. Perhaps if you're in an area that doesn't do that, maybe you could explore a course that would help you facilitate those skills. But yeah, overall I would say it's not strictly essential, and I've never been asked for, you know, proof of any qualifications on any of my job applications. But I think that's also the beauty of it, because it means it's quite an open door. Some of my colleagues, for example, have science backgrounds. They may have not studied the arts like I did, so it's, you know, it could be a job for everyone, but I think the core skills, like we've already touched on, are still really important, and I think that's what makes a great communicator.
In terms of career progression, where do you see you going in the next 5 or 10 years?
It's a good question, and it's a question I'm still probably trying to answer myself in terms of what my personal ambitions are. I would say overall, in terms of the kind of hierarchies within communications roles, I would say it's probably less structured than some other industries. So I know I've got friends who are kind of management consultants, for example, and it's very hierarchical. You have quite clear review periods, and then you reach manager level and senior manager, and it's quite a step-by-step process. Communications can be a bit more flexible in that a lot of it is experience-based. You might come into communications a bit later on in life and be a brilliant communicator and have a lot of skills from your past career that, you know, may put you at a higher level. You may also reach the ranks really highly when you're more junior and might just grow quite quickly. So a lot of it, I think, depends on just experience. That's why I kind of touched on it earlier as well. But I think, you know, being a good generalist and applying yourself in lots of different industries at the beginning of your career actually sets you up really well, because I think it gives you a lot of experience. It teaches me, and I think I mentioned that in my Unilever interview actually, that so far I've had so many different types of experiences within the kind of marketing and communications world that actually that equips me quite well, because it means I can deal with areas unfamiliar to me and I can learn quickly, and that's a really big pull, I think, particularly in the kind of crisis world. And well done on your first English video.
You probably won't tell, but me and Emily were like stopping like a million times in between.
And I don't often do things on camera myself, so it's been a good challenge for both of us today, hasn't it?
And I really hope this video will help you to understand the corporate communication world, especially the crisis management side, better. Hopefully I will see you soon in my video.
Thanks for having me.
I think those NGs are more interesting than the real thing, seriously. That's so interesting. Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm sure that you guys will get a lot from this interview. I'm not sure. I'm actually not quite sure. So you guys should tell me. Okay, that is so interesting, Emily.
You know, maybe you mark it more rather than, wow, that's so interesting. You've blown my mind. Because I don't think anything I said was that interesting.
Thank you so much,
Start
Emily.
again. But I'm going to stop you if you say thank you all the time. So we've just finished our final question, and I'm waffling on, and I've said something really boring about my job, blah 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 blah. That's the end.
So thank you so much.
No more thank yous.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm sure that... Oh, I need to change battery.
And then you'll look back and be like, I have half an hour of footage, 10 seconds.